What threats could affect the various cloud deployment models? Stick around to find out.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in for more CySA Plus. That's right. We're talking threats centering cloud deployment models. And here to help us out, Dan, where do we get started? Because I know there are quite a few of the different deployment models. So where do we start?
Yeah, good question. Probably start right there with the different deployment models and to not get them confused with the service models.
Yeah.
Right. I love terminology. It's so much fun to because it's all seems the same in a lot of ways. Then you got to tease everything out. So when we're talking about deployment models, we mean those public cloud models, those private cloud models, hybrid and community cloud models, right? And we're going to basically in this episode, we're going to walk through each one of those and just kind of like talk about the threats that are associated with each type of those models. So I wanted to start right there and just kind of get that out of the way and make sure that we're not having a conversation that I don't want you to have a different conversation than I'm having. We want to have the same conversation, be on the same page. That's what we mean. So we can jump right in and start talking about probably one of the most prevalent, if not the most prevalent, which is that public cloud, right? So with a public cloud, hopefully you're already at the level, if you're diving into CySA Plus, that you understand these deployment models. But just really basically, the public cloud is infrastructure that I don't own. I'm putting it out into a public platform, something like AWS or Google or
Azure.
Azure. Yeah, I always forget Microsoft because I don't like them. I say I don't like them. I don't use them because I like other things better. Let me put it that way. It's not that they're bad. I just like other things better. AWS. Anyway, that's what it means. I'm going to push up some of my infrastructure or all my infrastructure. Actually, that's what this would be. I'm going to take my infrastructure. I'm going to push it off into the cloud. I got nothing on-prem. I'm not doing on-prem. I'm going cloud. That's where I like it. And there's a lot of great, as we've already talked about, a lot of great solutions for doing that. And there's a lot of organizations that can handle that kind of thing. And ours is one of them, honestly. I would say we're public cloud. I don't think we have very much infrastructure at all. It's so
rare.
little,
Yep.
and it's not something we typically use. So I would classify us as a public cloud entity, and that's the deployment model that we work with.
Sure.
All of our stuff is up there, and that's how it works. But we've got those threats to get at, right? That's not where the game ends. So what are the threats? I'm going to go number one on my program and number one in my heart, which is the multi-tenancy, right? If Wes puts his organization's technology in the cloud and I put my organization in the cloud and we're both on, I'll say Azure, right? We both go Azure. Maybe we're in the same, or we're sharing the same resources. Maybe I'm in the same, what do they call this thing? I can't think of the word right now. It's escaping me.
Tenant?
No, not the tenancy, with the data centers, right?
Sure.
Maybe we're sharing a data center. We're in that same.
The same rack and stack.
Right,
Yep.
right.
Absolutely. Yep.
I'm in there. Well, I am crazy security guy, and I go buck crazy to make sure that everything is on lockdown. I'm putting patches. I'm doing vulnerability assessments, and we're going nuts.
All right, now let me wear the hat that I don't change defaults. I have all of the default accounts, all the default passwords, basic instances spin up that aren't hardening, no hardening, no security engineer going on, and now you live in that same space with me.
That's the threat. That's
Gotcha.
exactly.
Oh, that is. I am the threat.
You are the
Yes.
threat.
Not really,
Because
but-
I'm sharing resources
Sure.
with him. I'm open to whatever attacks he's open to, right? Well, I say that they could jump virtual machines, right? They
Like
could,
VM sprawl,
VM sprawl.
escaping. Sure, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yep.
This is what we talk about with the dangers, the threat of having multi-tenancy in that public
So
cloud.
isolation is key and one of the most critical things.
Right.
Sure.
So if you're using a public solution, you have to worry about multi-tenancy, okay? What else do we have to worry about? Unencrypted data crossing a variety of networks. That's right. What if the data that you have in this data center is now going to go to this data center because they're migrating it over because this one needs to be, there's going to be some updates or something. So they're moving your data and it doesn't get encrypted. Do you have control over that? Probably not, right? The data you do have control over, is that being encrypted, right? So you got to worry about that. It is your responsibility to encrypt your own data. If you're not doing that, then you have left yourself open. And it is public It is going to be out there. It is an internet entity. Think about this. Would you feel comfortable, Wes, I'll get your opinion on this one. You weigh in. Would you feel comfortable having unencrypted sensitive data on an internet-facing portal?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Right.
What I think about is let's step away from even the cloud model deployment here. Let's think about back to the days where we had multiple sites. A company controlled all of those sites going over WAN links. Would you send your encrypted data or unencrypted data across those WAN links? Probably not. And my thought would be it'd be the same thing if we think about now the WAN is controlled by an ISP or a cloud service provider.
Yeah, I love your analogy because people think you're crazy now to do that, right? And you should think that. Should be encrypting all over the place, drives, data at rest, data in motion, doesn't matter, right? Should all be done. Compliance, let's move on to that. Compliance can be an issue. Maybe you are in a regulated industry that really has some heavy compliance issues that if you were to move into a public cloud, you would have trouble with conforming to.
Well, data can traverse international boundaries, right?
That's
I mean, you
totally
look
true.
at somebody as big as AWS. I mean, they've got one of the largest collections of data centers worldwide. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be here in the U.S. shores, right?
That's exactly right. If that data crosses an international boundary, how does that jive with your compliance? Is that okay? Now that it's in another area geographically, what's the compliance there? And are you compliant with that? So you have to be aware of these things. I'm not saying it's going to happen or that it would be a problem, but it might be. You need to know your environment and whether or not a public deployment is going to be the right solution based off the threats that surround it. Okay, so that's basically what we're talking about. So make sure that that if you are crossing boundaries, that you know whether or not the laws there are less or more stringent, and whether or not your compliance is going to be okay with you doing a public cloud deployment.
You know, Dan, I'm thinking about something here. What if I'm a big company and I've got endless buckets of money to throw at the problem, right? So I decide I'm going to spend all of the expense and I'm going to have my own infrastructure. I'm not going to rely on AWS. I'm not going to rely on GCP, Google Cloud Platform, or Azure. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to host my own cloud. I should be safe, right?
Oh, you would love to think that, wouldn't you?
Now, let's be transparent here. I know that's not the case,
Right.
But what would we be looking at?
You're just really some of these threats are always going to cross pollinate. You always need to be encrypting data. You always need to be like checking whether or not the security in rest or in motion is good. But each one of these types of deployment models will have their own set of issues. So you just trade one for another. So you just need to be aware of them. That's really what this boils down to. This is more of an awareness. Like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go with a private deployment because of regulation or whatever. So what do I need to be aware of when I'm going to go completely on-prem, private deployments, that kind of thing, right? So with privates, you don't have to share a tenancy. That's good, right? But, and it does, I like this, offers you more control over the security itself. So I know where that data is going to go. I know where it's going to reside. I know the security that's in place. I have granular fine-tuned control because it's mine. It's given to me, right? So there is that aspect though. That's a good thing. But let's see here. It can be expensive though, right? Wes brought that up. I got buckets of money. You're gonna need buckets of money because it's expensive. It's gonna cost you $1 or $2, and that could tap your resources. That is a threat. If someone were able to gain access to it and start spinning up or like doing that, we see that also in public as well. If I was able to sap all your resources or drive your electric bill through the roof, that's a real possibility. Or maybe you're just doing it because that's how big your infrastructure is. Is that going to be plausible? Is that going to be feasible? Right? Plus, you got to have all your stuff in one spot. If a fire catches and your data center burns to the ground, where's that data? Do you have the backups? Have you been doing backups? So having that, if you go in a private model, did you go with a single a single point of failure, right? That's another reason you need a lot of money, because a lot of times you're going to go, well, I'm going to have multiple private clouds that are replicating each other. so that if this dies, I still have this, and I got to do backup solutions, and I have to take care of all that stuff because it's mine, it's private to me. Okay.
Dan, would you say that, you mentioned, you have greater control over your information.
yeah.
Now, I hate to get proverbial on here, but I'm kind of going to. It just seems like with that greater control, that's nice, and maybe would be what you want, but that also seems like it comes with greater responsibility in making sure that that data is maintained. Now, what I mean is, you heard Dan already say, you're responsible for the information. It doesn't matter if it's in public or a private cloud, but in the public cloud, I can say, you know what? We're going to adhere to an SLA, and I see that in the cloud they've got the offerings of these compliance standards, and we're going to transfer some of the risk mitigation to them and pay them money. But it seems like with private, yeah, we have that greater control, but that responsibility can maybe fall squarely in our shoes.
You are picking up what I'm putting down. That's exactly where I was alluding to, going to next, which is that we have a lot of that responsibility. Oh, not a lot, all of the responsibility.
Interesting.
Of the CSP.
Okay. Yeah.
They're not doing it anymore. We're creating our own cloud. I can't go, hey, Amazon, a drive died.
Amazon says, who are you?
That's nice. I'm sorry about your luck.
We've got services if you'd like to buy them.
If you'd like to go into a public solution, we'd be happy to help you out there.
Sure.
Right? So those roles and responsibilities do fall on us. And now, do we have the manpower and the resources to handle that? What if a server dies? What's my like if I need to get new hard drives, how fast could I have them? Do I have them? Do I have hot spares ready to go? Do I have cold spares ready to go? How much money am I? You should see. I've been a part of one of these solutions before. That was like my first introduction into virtualization and cloud, was to build an on-prem cloud solution. So it was a lot of work, and it was a lot of overhead. And when things died, you had to be in a server closet doing a bunch of stuff and getting phone calls at 2 a.m. So it's not a lot of fun when it comes to that. It's great when it's working. It's not great when it's not working. Public clouds are a whole lot more fun when it's not working, because then you just go, hey, AWS, fix my stuff. Azure, Microsoft, make it happen. I'm paying you money. I want to see it.
And that's where we find out that SLAs just mean how much credit that they're going to give to your account. Now, I know that there are, in some of the models, Dan, we have maybe, two companies, if you will, that are kind of moving forward towards the same goal. Let me give you an example and set this one up here. So, for instance, you have maybe a series of doctor's offices. You have a series of health insurance companies. They sometimes need access to things that typically fall, well, say here in the States, under HIPAA. Maybe you're in the European nations, maybe it's GDPR. So we have access to the same pool of resources in something like a community deployed environment here. Now this seems like it could lead to a whole bunch of finger pointing.
Yes.
Well, that's you should have secured. Well, wait a second here. That's not me. That's you. So I know we have things like, inter-site agreements that we establish beforehand, but we have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem with community clouds is going to be two things that are basically related to each other. One is going to be that whole idea of,
it was him. He did it.
yeah, clearly defined roles not happening, right? Like, whose responsibility is this in our community? So if, like you said, we're a group of doctors that have come together and say, man, we're really going to cut costs by going in on a community-based cloud where we're sharing resources and blah, 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 blah. Everybody's accessing the same kind of data. It's great. It's going to be great. Except for, hey, Billy, I noticed our PHI is all over Pastebin. Somebody sent me a link. What's this about? You're supposed to secure that stuff. No. And then the finger pointing stuff starts happening. So you need to make sure that security roles specifically are clearly defined. Who's supposed to do what? And what are those responsibilities and what is the extent of them? All right. The other thing is a lack of oversight. All right. Well, I know what my role is, but no one's really watching. So I can kind of I've actually seen this in real life, and it did not go well, and people lost their jobs. So when people feel like no one's watching, then a lot of times it can happen. It doesn't always happen, but it does happen, is there can be things slip through the cracks. Let's put it that way. And not through dereliction of duty or anything, but I didn't know that was happening, or I was unaware of this, or I was unaware of that, because there's no oversight.
So not malicious, but just unintentional, right?
It's unintentional.
And again, just because it's unintentional doesn't mean you're not responsible for it, right?
Exactly.
Ignorance of the law doesn't mean, sure.
So you need to, when you're creating those roles and responsibilities, also build in mechanisms for making sure that those things are getting done and getting done correctly, right? And then constantly auditing and reviewing those processes to make sure that you haven't missed anything. And then evolve. Learn from the mistakes that you made in the past to make it more robust in the future.
You know, when IT Pro TV first started out, I'd say we were closest to this model. And the next model that we're going to talk about is probably the most popular and common model in the world today. I would say early on in IT Pro TV's career or lifespan, that's where we started out. And I think Dan's right. We've moved more to the completely public, and that's the hybrid, right? And what do we mean by hybrid? Like Dan said, hopefully you know, but real quick recap, some's in public, some's on-prem. We've got a little bit of both, and we've got a connection between both of them.
Just can't make up our minds, can we?
Yeah. I'm in, I'm out. I'm in, I'm out. But where do we go from there?
All right. So with a hybrid cloud, they are obviously, because they are a mixture of public and private, they are going to suffer from the threats that go against both public and private. So you've now aggregated threats from both of those atmospheres. So be aware of that. Lack of redundancy in a public or private cloud infrastructure can be an issue, right? Because costs can start going crazy. Redundancy can be very difficult. So replication sites, hot site backups, that kind of stuff. Don't forget, you've got those on-prem devices. You've got to worry about whether or not they're going to work, especially if they're integrated. If I've got maybe like a database on-prem and I've got the web app in the public and my database goes down, well, my web app stops working as well, right? So that's where they start, that commingling can be a real difficult thing. And if you have some redundancy built in, again, going back to those points of failure, the more points of failure you have, the better off you are. So make sure you implement some redundancy in there.
How do we, tell me where things like the IAAA thought process comes in, and what we're talking about is identity, authentication, authorization, and accounting in general. That has to come into play.
It just make sure that you apply it to both.
Oh, so just have it.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Gotcha.
Have it. And that it is your responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
sure.
If you have on-prem stuff, that's your business. Like, you need to do that. Mm-hmm. But it also needs to be employed, right? If you're going to have some sort of single sign-on solution that's going to access both of those resources, then you have to make sure it's robust. Mm-hmm. It can handle that kind of exposure. So it's got to be done in a really good way. So you've got to be on point when it comes to your access management of both of those systems, because I'm going to have people, if I have that type of deployment model, I'm going to have people that have their feet in both of those environments, especially my IT administrators or my help desk workers or something like that. They might have access to both environments. And if their credentials and their mechanisms that they're using to access those systems are weak in any way, it leaves myself open. So make sure that those things are robust and that they are being implemented in those systems.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, we talked a lot about cloud deployment model threats. Remember, some of them are unique, but some of those threats also cross-pollinate. It's going to be up to you to understand the difference between the private, the public, the community, and the hybrid cloud threats on the CySA Plus exam. Now, speaking of CySA Plus, we got more to come. We don't have the time in this episode, so we hope to see you in upcoming episodes.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.